I'm Kathy Packer. I'm a member of the faculty of the School of Journalism and Mass Communication. I'm also the director of the UNC Center for Media Law and Politics, and I'm one of the organizers of today's day-long campus-wide First Amendment celebration. We proclaim today to be First Amendment Day in an attempt to build awareness of the importance of the rights protected by the First Amendment. We want to impress upon students and others in our university community the special role of the public university as a marketplace of ideas, and to discuss just what that means to us. Financial support for today's event comes from the Liberty Tree Initiative, the First Amendment Center at Vanderbilt University, and the McCormick Foundation. Thank you to our sponsors, although they're not here. Today's events were organized in large part by the UNC Center for Media Law and Policy and campus-wide. This particular event was the idea of and was organized by Sam Wardle. This is Sam right here. Sam is a senior journalism major, and thank you, Sam, for your good work. I encourage you after this event to continue to attend our First Amendment Day events. After this, we have a keynote address at 7 p.m. Greg Lukanoff from FIRE is here. He actually is here. And we'll be giving an address at 7 o'clock on the first floor. And following that, we will have story time with cookies and milk. And we have some student groups who will be reading from controversial children's books. And that event will be immediately following the keynote address. It's on the third floor of the conference room. Thank you very much for coming. I look forward to hearing your free expression. Sam, and I think Sam's going to introduce the panel.
That's right. Thanks everybody for coming out. Before I introduce the panel and get started, I just wanted to say I'm really grateful to these panelists for coming here tonight, because so much of the press coverage and the discussion of the events of the past few months has depicted the two sides that these students represent. It's kind of screaming at each other, going for each other's throats, and that's not at all the reality with the people on this panel. And so I'm thankful to them and thankful to you for coming out for a reasonable, calm discussion of some important issues. From my left, your right, this is Nikhil Patel. He's the president of Youth for Western Civilization, a group that is not afraid of controversy, as we all know. YWC invited Congressman Tom Tancredos to speak on campus in April. In case you didn't hear, things didn't go so well at the speech. There was a lot of controversy after that. Which brings me to my next panelist, Haley Koch, who is the only student to be arrested in connection with that speech and the protests that shut it down. Haley was arrested outside of a classroom by campus police in front of her classmates and her teacher. The charges against her were thrown out a few weeks ago. And then on my right is First Amendment attorney Hugh Stevens. Mr. Stevens is from Raleigh, and he has litigated in some key First Amendment cases in the past few decades, including the Food Line Capital Cities case. He was also a student at UNC Chapel Hill in the 60s, and he was co-editor of the Daily Tar-Heel during the speaker ban. So we're very glad to have him here. I will start out by just going right into it. The protesters, Haley among them, who broke up the Tancredos speech, were really taken to task in the press and on editorial pages for their tactic of shutting down the speech by making noise, holding up banners, stomping, chanting. And I'd like to hear some thoughts, first of all, from Haley, about whether or not you think Mr. Tancredos' right to free speech was violated by that tactic.
Sure. Thanks, Sam. I'm glad to be here tonight. And just a brief factual clarification that I would like to put is that Tom Tancredos decided to leave the event, that my protest did not stop the event, and that it was actually his decision to leave. The event was not ended by the protesters or by the campus police. So I just think that's an important clarification. But on to your point, the First Amendment states that Congress shall make no law, and then goes on to delineate the categories. And seeing as how I am not a member of Congress, I'm not a representative of the state or the police in any way, it is actually impossible for me to violate Tom Tancredos or anyone else's First Amendment rights. And Mr. Stevens would like to speak more to that, but that's my answer to that question.
Mr. Stevens.
Well, technically, I suppose that's right. The free speech clause of the First Amendment is intended to protect against government interference or government intrusion. And so I suppose you could parse it that way, but at the same time, it's clear that individuals who are acting out of other motives and who have no government imprimatur on their actions, nevertheless can and do impede and interfere with people's right to speak. And so I think I'd have to say that although Haley is probably technically right, in the legal sense, I think that's really quibbling over small potatoes. I think the fact is that what went on there was certainly intended to disrupt the speaker, and whether it in fact did, certainly what I saw in the video, certainly was not an atmosphere in which someone's right to speak was respected that way.
So it was more of a violation of the spirit of free speech than some sort of illegal act.
Well, I don't know exactly what charges were brought against anybody who was there, and I'm not a judge, so I guess the judge made a decision that there was no legal violation.
Haley, what was the charge?
Disturbing the peace at an educational institution, which falls under the disorderly conduct statute.
And why did the judge throw that charge out?
The judge threw the charges out because he said that I did not violate that law. It actually never got to a First Amendment issue. He said that I did not violate the law because of the way that the law has been decided, which has to do with the nature of the school event and also the nature of the disruption. He watched the video evidence and didn't think that I had, in fact, disrupted the peace. Definitely violate the statute. So that's what happened. I just want to take a small issue. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this point because I think there's other more interesting questions. But I do think the difference between myself as an individual or myself as a part of a protest is a very big difference between me, interrupting someone's speech in the state, making a law that prevents someone from speaking. I don't think that's a small distinction. I didn't want that point to sort of get swept to the side.
Sure. Something I think that's interesting about the protest and what's followed it, who here knows what Mr. Tancredo was here to speak about? What was it? Illegal immigration, specifically in-state college tuition for the children of illegal immigrants. And how many of us have seen a newspaper article about that issue in regards to that speech? Almost none of the coverage has been about the issue of the speech. It has been about Mr. Tancredo himself, it's been about the protesters' tactics. So I wanted to ask Nikhil what you think was lost as a result of the protest.
Well, the most obvious answer to that is the fact that the initial issue was swept under the rug entirely. It was completely overshadowed by the protests and the now debate about free speech. Yeah, that's pretty much it. The entire issue of taxpayer subsidization of the education of undocumented immigrants has not been discussed at all. And it's an important issue that needs to be addressed, and it seems that no one is willing to address it around the events that occur around it.
Haley, I want to know if you feel like that's a victory or a defeat for the protesters.
I think certainly the reason to protest was to try to bring some of these issues to the light, and certainly immigration was one of those issues, and white supremacy and hate speech on our campus, which I think is something that we really tried to foreground throughout this. The media has at times made it challenging, but in all of our press conferences and rallies outside the courthouse and every statement we've made, we've really tried to say that these are the real issues at stake here. And so I think it's unfortunate that the event, that the coverage didn't allow that to come to the fore, but I don't take full responsibility for that. I think there were other factors at play in that narrative, I guess. But
There's something to me that seems really similar to this protest and to the so-called town hall healthcare debates that we viewed on television or maybe in person. So I wanted to ask Mr. Stevens, this tactic that's being used apparently by all sides of the political spectrum to keep a speaker from making any point at all. What can you tell us about that?
Well, it rarely descends to the level of being a criminal act, something that is actually punishable. But I think it's a very great concern to me that we seem to be losing our capacity for civil discourse in this country about all kinds of subjects. Tom Friedman had a piece in the New York Times yesterday or the day before about this and how when we denigrate other people for whatever reason, on the basis of whatever policy or issue, and we basically say they are unworthy to be heard and we vilify them, we really coarsen the public debate to the point where in some cases it can actually become almost dangerous, particularly for people who are minorities or who are in a vulnerable position for whatever reason. I don't see this primarily as a legal issue. In either the context of the Tancredo event here or the town hall meeting. I see it primarily as an issue of civility and a lack of understanding of the purpose of the First Amendment and the purpose of free speech in a democracy. If we don't have the ability to hear each other, then the value of the speech itself is lost because people are not listening. And having fought with students years ago at this university for the right to listen, I find it troubling that apparently a lot of people have decided that they would rather scream and yell than to listen themselves. It's very hard sometimes to listen to speech that we don't like. But it's a lot more important, it seems to me, to do that than to decide in advance that I have all of the rectitude on this issue and I'm going to shout down somebody who disagrees with me and I'm not going to listen to them because that simply denigrates the whole thing. And I think, by the way, it really does fly in the face of everything this university is supposed to stand for. If this is not the place where people can talk about controversial subjects and have people listen to them, I think we've got this serious lack of understanding of what not only the First Amendment is all about, but what a university is.
Well, that brings up an interesting point. I want to kick back to Haley. The sign you held up in front of Tom Tancredo's face literally said, "No dialogue with hate." And that to me says that you feel like some voices just shouldn't be heard. That some people just don't deserve a place to speak.
I think you both have raised a couple interesting points, and I'll try to go through them one by one. I think one is this issue of listening. And prior to the Tom Tancredo protest, I spent hours on the internet, on YouTube, reading interviews, reading articles. As we all know, Tom Tancredo was a former congressman. A few days after the protest, he was on Fox News. I'm not too concerned about his ability to speak in the public eye. He gets that opportunity all of the time, and so do many other people with views like him. So for me, that's not really the real issue. What is at stake is the ability for a group that stated aims are to end multiculturalism and to end some of the things that I think this university really stands for, to be able to organize on this campus and to be able to promote a culture and a climate in which students don't feel safe and don't feel that their bodies are going to be allowed and accepted on this campus. So that for me is what's at stake, more than the 15 minutes, half an hour that Tom Tancredo would have been able to speak on this campus.
You didn't answer his question. Do you think there are people whose views are so vile or so bad, whatever labels were put on, that they simply shouldn't be heard?
I I do think that on this campus there are voices that I would rather not hear, I guess. And white supremacist groups are included in that.
So is it your view that the university should simply prohibit such people from coming here to speak at all? Is that your view?
No, that's not. I would hope that students would self-organize to determine what they think is acceptable in their campus community. If the administration chose to enter into that conflict that's already going on, I would hope that it would be in favor of creating a safer, more diverse, more welcoming community and not the other way. But it's not my position that the university administration should be legislating that.
Should they be concerned about creating a welcoming climate for people who come here to talk about controversial issues regardless of what their opinions are? Should they feel safe? Should they feel welcome here?
I think controversial issues and hate speech are two very different things that are being conflated, and I think that a group and people whose stated aims are to end multiculturalism and to end diversity, or if someone wanted to bring a speaker from the KKK or a neo-Nazi, I would similarly come out and oppose. And there are other people that I would come out and say, I don't feel that their voices contribute to a civil debate or to an intellectual climate. I believe that controversy should certainly remain on this campus and will.
It must be nice to have all the answers at such an early age.
Mr. Stevens, what would be a kind of protest, a way for students to publicly display their disapproval of somebody like Mr. Tancredo while respecting free speech?
Well, picketing has a long and honored tradition on this campus, for example. Whether it involved, I remember friends of mine who stood day after day, year after year in front of the post office protesting the Vietnam War. I remember marches for civil rights, frankly marches against civil rights back in the day. There are lots of ways to express your opinion in opposition to someone without, at the same time, preventing them from expressing their viewpoints. And frankly, a lot of those can be much more constructive. I frankly think the best antidote for speech that you don't like is for you to speak and explain why the speech should not be acceptable or should not be listened to. But that's different from denying someone the right to speak their mind in the first place. So, I said that in the piece I wrote for the Daily Target after the Tancredos, and I described the behavior of the protesters in that particular instance as infantile and incredibly rude, and I'll stick by that. I think that's exactly it. There are better and more constructive ways to oppose views that you disagree with.
Let's shift gears for a minute and move this over to Nikhil. Since the protest, Youth for Western Civilization has kind of been in the same situation with its faculty advisor as Spinal Tap was with its drummer. Bad things seem to happen to them.
Would you clarify that?
It's on YouTube. After the protest, Chris Clemens, who was then YWC's faculty advisor, removed himself as their faculty advisor. And I wrote about this a little bit for the Independent Weekly, and I talked to Mr. Clemens. And he said he removed himself not because he was afraid of the controversy or he decided he didn't like these students or something like that. His answer really interested me because he said he already sponsored 6 or 7 conservative student groups, and that there are so few conservative faculty members on this campus that conservative groups sometimes just can't find somebody to sponsor them. And YWC went the rest of the semester and a lot of the summer without a faculty advisor, and their existence as a group was very much in doubt until Dr. Kramer stepped in and was able to advise them for a few weeks, and then was forced to step down again. And now you found a new batch of advisors, which includes Mr. Clemens again. So I'd like to ask Nikhil if you feel like this is a de facto restriction of speech of conservatives on campus.
In this particular situation, not so much. Dr. Clemens stepped down because he didn't have the time to devote to YWC on his own. And then Dr. Kramer was asked to step down by the chancellor because of an email that he sent me in response to a failed welfare.
Can you tell us what that was?
So there were brochures being circulated around campus, and part of it had Dr. Kramer's home address on it and a plea to go dissuade him from being a YWC advisor for reasons such as supporting white supremacy and things of that ilk. Apparently Dr. Kramer has a printout if he wants to circulate that.
Not a very good picture. I've got a much better picture as a result. I'm very grateful for them.
So it's been good publicity. So when I was informed of the brochure, in part by Haley, by the way, I emailed Dr. Kramer and said there might be an issue of his concern because it's obviously a thinly veiled threat against his public welfare. He emailed back, or responded back in jest that he has a Colt 45, he knows how to use it. I understood that to be a joke.
And I used to be able to hit a quarter 7 times out of 10.
And that his aim is far better than mine will ever be. Sans, car and lights in theater. So I understood it to be a joke. He forwarded that email as well to Haley and Chancellor Thorpe, who didn't find it nearly as funny. And he believes, Chancellor Thorpe believed that this was not in the spirit of the discourse we were trying to promote on campus, and asked Dr. Kramer to step down. And that was the extent of that. It wasn't so much as wanting to censor the group, although it, in a way, almost did. It was simply that the remark itself was found pretty much offensive, which is, in a sense, another form of censorship, because apparently remarks about defending yourself with force are not welcome on this campus either. That's about as far as I'm going to go. So out of that, we've now gained a panel of advisors, Dr. Clemens being one of them, because now he's not the only one having to devote time. So, yeah.
Can I jump in and ask a question? And maybe somebody out there can chime in. I don't recall student groups having to have faculty advisors when I was a student here. When did this come?
It has been a requirement at least since the time of Susan Harringhouse, because I was sent a
another person who wouldn't know the First Amendment if it walked up and spit in her mouth. Actually, I wrote a letter to the editor of the Youth and Conservative. So she's a friend of mine too. Well, she's a friend of mine too, but she still wouldn't recognize me. Well, I must say I did send her an email regarding Nikhil's concerns that this might affect his, as has been suggested to him by some unpleasant visitors, that this might affect his acceptance to medical school. And she hasn't answered me. Can someone enlighten me to what the purported reason
A student group can't use university facilities unless they are faculty advisors. So I guess if you just wanted to have a student group in your apartment, you could certainly do that. But if you want to use the pit or use silent pizza classroom or something, that's what you can get a faculty advisor.
It is a recognized student group if it's got approved by the university and has an advisor.
I don't think the SDS has student advisor. I'm pretty sure the YAF did.
Well, no, that's a good point, actually, because, I mean, what does that mean for groups? For students to join a group is one thing, but for a faculty member who has his or her career to think about, who has to work with other people with diverse opinions, a lot of people who feel like they're in the political minority might not want to go out on a limb and have their name associated with a group like Youth for Western Civilization that stirred up controversy. Mr. Stevens, what effect do you think that can have on students holding sanctioned events like bringing speakers to campus?
Well, again, it's a policy and a process that I'm just not familiar with. I'm pretty sure that in my day, I'm beginning to sound like a dinosaur. In my day, that students were deemed to be responsible themselves until they somehow demonstrated otherwise. And you could certainly use university facilities and invite speakers and so forth, so long as you coordinated with the people who were at the facilities and so forth, and provided for the lights to be on or the security to be available because it's needed or whatever. And it seems to me that injecting the faculty requirement in here really is a manifestation of a kind of a basic distrust of students' ability to handle their own affairs that is troubling to me. Maybe it's not to anyone else, but certainly you have a group that's sufficiently controversial that no faculty person wants to put his or her name on as their advisor. Then it seems to me that has an indirect children's act on student speech and student activism.
May I just make a comment on this? It is somewhat important because I was at Haley's trial, and her attorney argued that the statute related to a university event, and he was claiming that this wasn't a university organization, but clearly it is a university-sponsored organization, so it's relevant in that sense.
Nikhil, how do you think this whole mess has affected conservative students? I don't know, outspokenness about their views.
It's affected everyone differently. Definitely there are some who have been scared off by the entire thing, being made to believe that being conservative on campus will get you shouted at, physically threatened, and so they've gone underground. But there have been others who are more willing to come out of the woodwork and support YWC, and including liberals actually, just on the basis of free speech. But on the whole, I think most conservative students are largely unaffected by it. Yeah, they pretty much feel the same now that they did 2 semesters ago before this.
Well, while we're on that,
I'm having trouble hearing over here. Could y'all can you
Sure.
raise your voice
Yeah,
a little
sorry.
bit? Sorry, Gil. Yeah.
Did you want me to repeat that?
there's some seats up front. Or we can just talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, people back here with the video camera phone get the sound bites.
Well, while we're on that subject, so Haley, obviously you didn't get any kind of legal sentencing for your role in this protest, but you didn't exactly come up with no consequences either. What did you go through as a result of being singled out?
Sure. So after the protest happened, student activists began being harassed by university police. Several students were sort of approached when they were going to the bathroom from classes and asked if they were there, and you know, the chancellor had issued a statement saying that they were going to be looking into it. So there was sort of an awareness that maybe legal action was going to happen, but nothing happened for a long time. 9 days passed, and I was in my communication activism class, ironically enough, and I left class and went outside, and I saw a police officer standing there on a bike, and I'm like, oh, feeling this guy's here to see me. And I finished a conversation with my friends, and the police officer came over to me and said, you know, Haley Koch? I said, yes, and he said, you're under arrest. And I was like, what? What for? And he wouldn't tell me what I was being arrested for. He just said, put your hands behind your back, and proceeded to handcuff me as my class was there. And my professor came out and said, you know, what is she being arrested for? Like, where are you taking her? And he said, you can try to call the police department and see if you can get any more information. And so my class was kind of like, what's going on? And then the cop was on a bike, so class for about 10 or 15 minutes, at which point some of my classmates tried to call my friends to let them know what had happened. And then he walked me from where I was, sort of across campus a little ways to where we met another officer in a car, a male officer who then patted me down and searched my stuff, and then took me to the police station on campus, where I was fingerprinted and interrogated, and then was transferred to the jail in Hillsborough, where I met with the magistrate and was eventually released on a $1,000 unsecured bond, and came back to campus. So that happened, and then my name was in the media right away. I was the only person who was arrested for the Tom Tancredos protest, although there were probably 250 people there at least protesting. So my name was all over the papers. As a result, I started getting really nasty emails and videos that people made of me, where they took photos of my Facebook, of photos of me with my black friends, for example, and made a video talking about how much I like Africans and how I clearly don't understand the superiority of the white race. There were 10-page forums at least devoted to talking about me on websites like Stormfront, which is a sort of the leading white nationalist website, AmericanRenaissance.com, whiteamerica.us, how to petition, asking the university to take my scholarship away, and I was receiving emails, and there's not enough time, nor is it interesting to go through all the kinds of comments that I got that were sexist and racist and horrible. But this went on for quite some time, and my address was out there, and there have been incidents in other towns of people who've organized against white supremacists who have been attacked in their homes, and people were making efforts on the internet. So it was kind of a horrible time. For better or for worse, I was homeless at the time, so I didn't have a home address, which made me feel a little bit safer. But anyway, all this was going on, and really served to try to intimidate students and student activists, and to send really a chilling effect across campus, and to say this is how we treat people who don't stay in line or don't sort of play by the rules.
I want to.
Who preferred the charges? Somebody, these are misdemeanors, somebody had to say there should be a charge. Who did? Somebody had to put their name on the charge and basically say, I, accuse, in effect, Ms. Koch of violating the law, disturbing the disorderly conduct. Who actually
My warrant just said the University of North Carolina. I guess, in tandem to that point, it is common practice, if even sometimes in felony charges, but often in misdemeanors, if something like this has happened, where it's a long time after, for you to sort of get a phone call or be contacted in some other way and say, there's a warrant, could you come into the station? In which case I would have immediately gone to the police station, and the sort of spectacle wouldn't have had to happen. It was 9 days later, they were waiting for me. When you read the arrest report, it says that they secured all the access. I mean, as if, I don't know what, I was going to try to run away or something.
Let me say, I said early on that I was embarrassed by what happened at the Tancredos. I was embarrassed for the university. But I want to say, I was also, if this arrest went down the way you say, I'm embarrassed for the university about that too. That was absolutely unwarranted and unreasonable under the circumstances. Because you're absolutely right. Generally speaking, when someone is going to be charged with a misdemeanor like this, it plays out exactly the way Haley said. You get a phone call, there's a warrant, you go down, make an appearance, they release you on your own recognizance, show up, and so the idea that there was a public arrest and that you were really handcuffed, that's not, well, the university should be embarrassed about that. That's just not the way students should be treated who have nothing more to answer for than the kind of activities that Haley was involved in. So it's like there was some bad judgment shown on lots of places.
Let me just note also, when I was writing a story about this for the Independent, I called campus police and asked them why they just singled out Haley. I was at the event, I took lots of pictures, they were printed in a newspaper, lots and lots of other people were there. There are videos on YouTube you can go and watch. And the response was, well, Haley's been kind of an outspoken activist on campus, and the police already knew who she was, so that she was the only one they could identify definitively, and that's why they arrested her. What effect do you guys think that might have for future students who want to get active in politics on campus?
Yeah.
Anybody?
Because any student who wants to speak up, it's a horrible thing to do. Any student who wants to get involved, if they plan on having a political future or a future in medicine or anything, we're going to have a background check. To have an arrest record for something like this is bad enough, but to have it being made a spectacle when it shouldn't have been, it puts you in a much worse light and makes it much harder to get on with your life. It actually would scare people out of activism.
You know, and I think that's something that was really upsetting around when it happened. And, you know, the Daily Tar Heel, for example, has continued to publish editorials against me, and sort of against the protest, but mostly against me. So it continues to be sort of this narrative of, like, you know, the one bad apple or like the one protester, which is a narrative that often gets played out in these kinds of situations. But I think that the fact that Judge Buckner and my lawyer were able to set a legal precedent saying that this wasn't in fact an illegal act, that it wasn't, in fact the charges were dismissed, not only was I not guilty, but the charges were thrown out, I think that's really important. And of course I was pleased with the victory for my own sake because I didn't want to have a criminal conviction, but I think even more important for me was the message that it was able to send to campus. And to be able to say that, like, I'm still an activist, I will continue to be an activist, we will continue to organize, and after I was arrested, one of the main things that sort of stuck with me besides, you know, of course, all of the hate mail and the threats was the amount of support that I got from people, from professors, from people who've been organizing. When I was threatened with losing my scholarship, some of the other protesters came together and said, we will start fundraising right now to pay for the rest of your college if you lose your scholarship. I mean, like, that's incredible. And so for me, it was like this strange moment of both being upset at this kind of treatment and also being like, well, it's clear which kind of community I want to be a part of, and that's the one that bands together and tries to love and support each other in times that are difficult. So.
Mr. Stevens, I know you said some things already about the university's behavior here, but I'd like to ask you more specifically about the impact on future activism, that they were able to just single Haley out and then just go and arrest her and leave everybody else who they didn't know alone.
Well, it seems to me that what the university's role should be is to set a tone and provide setting for civil discourse, and to really try to make it clear to people that really nobody benefits from this kind of situation on either. It wasn't a good thing for the university to have Tom Tancredos sort of appear to win the day. You know, here's a person whose views I don't care for either, but made a martyr out of him by what happened here, and that's an unfortunate result. It seems to me. And certainly what happened to Haley, it seems to me, is way over the top given under the circumstances. But what the university, it seems to me, really should do is to try to not only set rules and have, but to set an atmosphere where free speech really does happen in a context where people are not shouting each other down, but they are actually engaging in a discourse that is constructive in the sense of at least exchanging ideas, exchanging views about things. And I'm not sure exactly how to do that. Obviously, on the one hand, you don't want to have an event occur like the Tancredos one that gets out of hand and the speaker feels sufficiently intimidated that he or she actually leaves. But, you know, how exactly you deal with that, you certainly, I don't think you need to have people arrested and handcuffed on campus. Part of it. One question that I have here, and again, I'm going to try hard not to sound like an old fogey here, but does the campus honor code come into play anywhere here? It used to. Is it still? Is there any,
I don't know that anybody's reported her, but I think if she does it again, I'll report it.
I mean, I just don't know. I mean, I think we all, part of it is that the university really needs to make it plain from day one when you come here, whether as a faculty person or as a student, that certain amount of civility is expected of you. And that includes being tolerant of and listening to people whose views you may vehemently disagree with. And of course, but at the same time, being able to speak your own views just as forcefully and just as affirmatively, and that you should have that opportunity as well. So I think that's something that falls to university leadership, and I'm not sufficiently familiar with what goes on or doesn't go on here to say what should be done about it. It's just that it's a concern to me that if that atmosphere does not exist, then I think that's very unfortunate.
We've got about 15 minutes left, and I wanted to save the end for people in the audience to ask questions. Any of the panelists? Go ahead, man.
Go ahead.
You.
Okay, hey, I don't know why this point wasn't made, especially by Nikhil, but YWC, I think what's being lost is that it is not a white supremacist organization, at least the affiliation on this campus. And I know about Tancredo. I actually voted for him in the primary, Republican primary, as a protest vote against McCain. Not a huge fan of Tancredo, but he's not a Nazi. And I just feel like it was almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. I'm not denying that what happened to you afterwards happened, the video was and such, but I feel like that's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy when you act that way and you make a martyr out of something that doesn't really exist. I just wanted to ask Haley, glad I met you, you're very nice. Who is the we that you're saying? You're saying the we have answered questions and we protested on the courts. I just want a clearing up of the definition.
Sorry, when?
You said we protested and we made statements to the newspapers, and then you said that you were activists. So I'm asking, one, what does that mean, activists, and two, who are the activists that are leading?
Sure. Can I respond to your first point first? So, Youth for Western Civilization, we could probably have a whole other conversation about whether or not it does indeed have white supremacist ties, so I won't go deep into it.
Yeah,
but
that's not the conversation we
I would
want to
just
have.
say quickly that if you look at the mission statement of Stormfront, which is a white nationalist group, and you look at the mission statement of Youth for Western Civilization, they are almost identical. And Youth for Western Civilization does have a stated aim to end multiculturalism and does have ties that we can elaborate at a later time to groups like the Canada. So that's one thing. Second thing, who is the we? After my arrest, something called the UNC Protesters Defense Committee was formed, which is basically a group of interested students, non-students, community members who felt like the arrest and sort of the aftermath of the event went really badly and were interested in. So there's probably 25 people in that group, and then probably another 30 to 50 people who have been involved in organizing either whether it's the rallies that took place in the courthouse or writing letters to the editor in support or doing other kinds of organizing work, contacting the chancellor, contacting other members of the university and things like that. So it's kind of a loose we, and I wouldn't claim that group has any sort of coherent ideology or positions except for the ones that we laid out in the public statement.
So you don't have a faculty sponsor?
No, we are not an officially recognized group. We do not use rooms on campus. Third question was activist. Someone who is committed to working to make the world a better place, I suppose, would be a general answer, and who's strongly invested in struggling against all forms of oppression. I've done a lot of work against racism, classism, sexism, homophobia, and sort of am really compelled to look at the ways that all of these structural inequalities are found in our communities and on our campus, and what are the ways that we can dismantle those hierarchies and the structural oppression. That's a really short answer.
Hyman?
think that what's so significant is that we have both of you here today, and the last time that you were semi-together in a place with a crowd, it didn't go too well, and that's why we're here in the first place. So I just want to know, what can we expect from YWC and from Haley and your supporters in next events? We have one coming up next week. What are you willing to do? How are you willing to communicate so that we don't have such a mess again, and we'll end up in a room like this next year when we do First Amendment Day again, hopefully. So it goes to the two of you.
You have some speakers lined up, right?
Yeah, we have Baby Cannon coming next week. It's going to be the normal speech and then a Q&A session afterwards. It'll be in the Union Auditorium from 8 to 10, exactly 1 week from now. We don't plan on doing anything special to defend against protesters except having a few more cops around, just in case. After that, it's all going to be panel discussions with people for YWC stance and against, just to keep a balanced argument. I'm going to keep in contact with Haley. Just if you know of any protests, I'd like to know, just so you can prepare. But you're more than welcome.
Yeah, and these guys have actually been having beers together. Just
The White House.
You guys can all join, but we're not going to do the everyone buys around thing.
I guess briefly, I would just say that I would hope that there would continue to be protests. I would hope that there would be a protest next week at the Baby Cannon event. I think these issues are still important and still have not been addressed. I can't speak for any body of students, but I believe that there will continue to be organizing against Youth for Western Civilization's presence on this campus. And I believe there will continue to be work. I myself will continue to do work that tries to expose some of these things. And if it gets a little messy, then it gets a little messy. Sometimes things get messy, and sometimes tensions need to be exposed, tensions that already exist, right? So these aren't tensions that have been created by the protests. These are tensions that exist in our society that these protests are helping to expose.
Haley, you say you will continue to protest these things. In what capacity and how?
Oh, I can't give it all away.
Okay, got in the yellow shirt.
Yeah. You mentioned, I'm just curious, but you mentioned your scholarship a couple times. I was wondering how you square your views on free speech and free academic inquiry with your duty to uphold the pillars of the Morgan King Foundation, one of which is scholarship. And just a quote from the website is, they look for scholars for whom learning is an appetite rather than a means to an end. So, which would imply some sort of free marketplace of ideas, but yet in past actions it seems that your desires to not allow that marketplace to function. So how do you square your personal views with that of your scholarship?
I actually think I really well uphold the tenets of the Morgan King Foundation, and I think that all of my sort of extracurricular activist and academic work has shown that I'm a really engaged scholar. You know, I'm an honor student, I've been on a dean's list, blah, blah, blah. I'm writing an honors thesis currently, so I don't know that that's really...
Your views on free academic inquiry?
I mean, I would just reiterate the things that I've been reiterating before, that I think this isn't just about words that people are saying. This is about practices and organizations that seek to harm other people's bodies and that seek to end the kind of culture that I want to see on this campus and seek to put an end to multiculturalism at my university on this campus. And that reminds me that I've been wanting to share something that I think speaks directly to this point, which is a letter that I received from a woman who worked with the Coalition for College Access last year.
Could we say that video?
Sure.
But I want to make sure everybody gets a chance.
Yeah,
So we
well,
got
I'll
it
come
in
back to
about
that
10 minutes. Guy in the back.
Hi, I just wanted to say something to Haley again, and this is sort of for your own benefit, I hope, is the impression I get from what you've said at this meeting is basically that you believe, as far as the First Amendment goes, that might equals right, that as long as someone agrees with what you have to say, that it's okay for them to speak in public. And I hope that if that's not your view, that you would think about the way you express your views to others so that you don't give someone, given your stature in the public eye now, whether you want it or not, I hope that you very carefully consider how you express your opinion so that if that's not what you believe, that you don't give people that impression.
Does anybody have a question for Nikhil or Mr. Stevens?
Hi. All of us just got out of media law, and I'm just curious. I agree with you philosophically about this desire to create an open forum at the university, but how would the university put rules on public speaking in a way that didn't infringe on our First Amendment rights? Like, would it be measuring decibels, or would it say that you can't throw things, or that you can't have signs? Could it do that in such a way that wouldn't be, hey, don't be mean?
Well, it is very difficult, you know, that, as you know, from your